So I'm really excited to present to you all Manveer. So Manveer actually self-taught himself coding at the age of 13 and dropped out of university, I believe, to start his project Scholar, which is up and live, and I'm sure he'll show you some demos of it today. And Manveer is really particularly passionate about the replication crisis that's going on in academic science. From a computer science background and coding background, he's building out some tools that will allow for the ability to vet how reproducible certain types of research might be, or certain types of papers or code base or data on the back end. So yeah, I've gotten to interact with Manveer on Twitter and virtually. So we haven't met in person yet, but virtually on a few calls. Yeah, Manveer is very, very passionate, very inquisitive, and what's I think most important is pragmaticism. And so you'll see it, I think, in kind of his discussion around reproducibility. You'll see it in kind of the presentation of some of the demos, but being able to identify a problem, but then also have a viable, meaningful solution to try to tackle that problem is very important. And so yeah, with that, I'll pass it over to you, Manveer. So take it away.
That was an awesome intro. Thank you, Jeffrey. I feel like you hyped me up a lot, and I have some big shoes to fill on that. But yeah, here, let me just share my screen, and then I'll get right into it. Yeah, I mean, as Jeff already alluded to, I'm the founder CEO of Scholar. You can check out our website there, but we're basically trying to build tools to enable more reproducible and like replicable research publication. We're more per se like focused on machine learning and computer science research for now, but we do want to expand this a little bit more broadly. And so I think the presentation that I'm gonna give today, I think the last presentation focused more on maybe perhaps like the regulatory standpoint and how like institutions are adapting to things. But I'm gonna put a more like probably like a technological focus on like where is probably the future of science going and what we can do to enable that future. And so the title of my talk is, or the title of my presentation is called How All Scientific Verification Becomes Replication. And I'm going to be talking about how there's some very large technological shifts on the horizon of AI, automation, and crypto that are kind of changing how scientific is communicated and verified. And I think it will probably lead to an increase in the importance of replicability and reproducibility. So then how can we build and enable that future? And also get into some demos later on too. So yeah, so I'll first start with where potentially decentralized science is going in the face of these big technological changes. And why that'll lead to a rise in replication and reproducibility as like this true test of scientific rigor. And then also finally in that world, in that future world, how can we build for it and just like enable more replicability and reproducibility of scientific research. So I'll start with where potentially decentralized science is going. And I'm gonna start with LK99, the recent superconductor paper that if you're on Twitter, you definitely heard about this. But I think LK99 was a really good glimpse into a potential future of decentralized science, where the scientific process unfolded really quite differently than how it used to. And so for that reason, I think it's going to be a really useful example to anchor some of the explanations I'm going to give. LK99 was, in a sense, the first truly internet native science moment. Amjad Masad, the CEO of Replit, had a really good tweet on this as well, where he pointed out that it was kind of like the first true case where scientific research unfolded really quite differently, and it happened all online and in a very decentralized manner, where the paper was published open by default, revisions were shipped on the fly. We had betting markets on the replicability of the research, live stream replications, and also random like internet nerds with like these anonymous profile pictures delivering pretty deep and valuable insights. And I think the other big observation is that it mostly all happened outside of the existing scientific complex of journals, peer review, and prestige and citations. It was fully decentralized in the sense where I think 20 years ago, you probably would have published to journals, you would have waited for peer review to happen. But instead, you just today you just post on archive and share on X. And so this journal distribution, in a sense, is almost getting disintermediated and decentralized by Twitter, X, and archive. And the important observation here, I think, is that science moved at the speed of the internet, not at the speed of the institution. So rather than waiting for months of peer review and waiting for like other authors to try to replicate work and then publish it in another paper, we were just able to establish legitimacy within days/weeks. So rather than months to establish legitimacy, it moved really quite fast. And the other big observation too is that it was really meritocratic and democratic in a sense, not very bureaucratic and oligarchic as a lot of the journal industrial complex is kind of like today. There was no real bureaucracy telling you that you needed to be very prestigious or you needed to have a certain level of citations in order to contribute to the conversation. It was very open access, it was very transparent and very egalitarian in the sense that anybody with sufficient competence could weigh in on the scientific discourse and contribute to the conversation. And I think this is kind of the future of science that we do want to see as stewards of DeSci. And I think it's definitely the direction that technology is also pushing us into. And the other observation that I point out too is that all peer review, prestige, and citations was ignored in the pursuit of replication. People kind of knew that no matter what peer review said about the paper, no matter how prestigious the authors were, and no matter how highly cited the previous work was, nothing really mattered if the paper didn't independently replicate. And I think this might be like what the future of science looks more like, where we ignore these old systems of doing things, these old markers of excellence and quality, and we just focus on establishing legitimacy through replicability. And the way that I would encapsulate this all is that technology is, in a sense, changing the nature of how research is published and verified. These technological forces that I kind of touched on slightly, with AI, automation, the internet, and crypto, they're very drastically like changing things. And I think they're becoming so strong today that we're almost reaching a tipping point where they can't really be contained within the existing academic research complex. And so we're seeing some inklings of them happening in a more like decentralized manner outside of that research complex. And I think we're really at just at the start of some massive potential tide shifts. And so I touched on how publication could potentially be changing, but I'm going to focus most of this conversation on how scientific verification could potentially be changing in the face of these big technological changes. So I'll first start with the observation that a lot of scientific verification today is really just like proxies for quality. And by proxies, I mean that these ideas of peer review, prestige, and citations, they don't really like independently replicate or verify the research. They just approximate the legitimacy of the science that's published. And we've operated in this realm of proxies for a while. Like there's just so much research published and so many researchers publishing that we kind of need to rely on these proxies to establish legitimacy and just like scale the scientific research to the level that it is and the level that it did reach within the industrial age. But also, I think a lot of people have become aware of the idea that these proxies are potentially failing us because there's been a lot of like fake, false, non-replicable research that has been published in the scientific record. And peer review that was meant to be a check on the quality of the research that was published, it didn't really do a good job of catching it. It was more peer review, not peer replication. And so for that reason, it was sort of a weak check on the validity of the research. And even these like indicators of excellence that we use of citations, they don't really correlate as strongly with correctness as they used to. There was a time where citations actually did correlate very strongly with high quality, high impact research. That was why Eugene Garfield initially pushed for their broad adoption in the 1950s. But things have kind of changed now. Citations have been gamed almost. And so for that reason, they're almost losing their credibility and weight. And there's some credible evidence that you can even correlate high citations with non-replicable research. And prestige as well, it no longer proxies quality as well as it used to. We've seen some very notable examples of prestige almost being abused for personal progression and self-preservation. And so for this reason, these sort of old markers of excellence that we've used for some time are losing their weight and losing their trustworthiness as indicators of quality. And the net result that we're seeing is that a lot of the things that we had set up to verify research are failing in this world. And unfortunately, I think AI will probably make things a lot worse. It'll probably reduce the credibility and the quality of these indicators of quality quite drastically. And why is that? It's because AI can already fake realistic pictures, and it'll probably soon fake realistic papers. The pace of progress that we're seeing with AI is really quite staggering today. It's getting really good at generating deepfakes, fake images, and I think by extension, we'll soon see it get pretty good at faking research papers. I think we might see fake results, charts, images, code, data, pretty much everything. It might just start with getting good at manipulating existing legit data, as is already happening to some extent. But ultimately, at the rate of progress that we're seeing, I think within a couple of years, it'll ultimately be able to fake pretty much everything. People have been playing around with code interpreter to generate images, even like generating synthetic data as well too. And we've been teaching AI to get pretty good at generating code as well. And I think, yeah, if you plot these further advances in AI, I think this is probably the way that things are going. And unfortunately, this will give enormous leverage to malicious actors to abuse this technology to commit fraud. Even just the concept of paper mills alone, which are just built to push out plausible but ultimately fake research, I think they'll get enormous leverage with AI to continue that abuse and to continue to publish fraudulent research. And we've also seen like decades of examples of even like malicious actors skewing the results and manipulating the results in order to get published for self-career progression and preservation. And I think we might see that continue. I don't see any good reason why that won't continue. And I think the net effect is that we'll probably see a lot more fraud published within scientific literature. I mean, I'm not the only one making this observation. We've seen some pretty credible people and some pretty respectable people making this observation as well. But I think the net effect is that it's going to be a lot harder to tell whether a published paper is fake and manipulated or not. And unfortunately, our existing research complex, our existing academic complex is not very positioned well to adjust for this. It may not adapt well to these like exponential changes in in AI and like just technology more broadly that are coming. And so I think it would be useful to focus our efforts on building tools at the technological frontier to help to alleviate some of these issues, which I'll get into like a little bit later. But basically, it's in this future where AI erodes our ability to trust PDF papers, where peer review prestige and citations no longer correlate that well with correctness, that I see replication rising as the only way to really verify the legitimacy of research, where replication becomes the only thing that we can really trust and the only true test of scientific rigor. And this is kind of how I see all scientific verification becoming replication, that as these old proxies for quality fail to really correlate with quality, we just focus a lot of our efforts on replicating research and establishing legitimacy through replicability. And this is kind of exactly what happened with LK992 with the superconductor paper, where we ignored the old ways of prestige, peer review, and citations and just focused on replication. And you might ask why replication? Well, it's because replication is in a sense a verification against ground truth. It's a verification against reality. Reality is in a sense the ultimate source of truth. It's why we run our experiments against it. And it's this verification against ground truth that is robust to AI. That no matter how much fake work is published, as long as we can verify that work against ground truth, we can tell whether it's legit or not. As long as we can replicate results, we can know if it's legit. But the other big thing that LK99 showed us is that we don't have a lot of good tools for replicability currently. We're not very well positioned for this future. It was third-party platforms that ended up serving a lot of the demand for replicability and reproducibility. And so we currently don't have good ways to have a market-determined estimate of how replicable research is. We don't have good ways of surfacing information on all of the replication attempts for a specific paper and just like listing all the results there for people to view. And it's also really expensive to replicate a lot of research, especially for research that involves a major physical world element, like a lot of wet lab research, for example. And yeah, even with the LK99 superconductor paper, it was third-party platforms like Manifold Markets and Wikipedia that ended up serving this demand for having information on replicability easily available. And we are in the age of exponential tech. So I think these changes with AI will probably come quite fast. And so if we do want to adjust well for this future, I think we should probably start building for it soon. Because these technological forces may come quite fast and they may uproot a lot of the old ways of doing things and a lot of these old markers of excellence. And so it would be useful to have a better order on the other side of that in order to preserve the integrity of science in this future. So what are some potential things that we can do? I think from my perspective, I see 3 potential solutions that have the that can have impact on alleviating some of these issues. One of them is on-chain publication. The other is replication markets. And then the third is minimizing the long-term cost to replicate. So I'll go through each of these solutions individually. So the first is on-chain publication. So I think I alluded to this a little bit before, but I think in the near future, PDF papers won't be enough for us to determine whether research is legit or not. What we'll need is more information. That means like code, data, even machine artifacts, things like that. Anything that can increase our confidence that the information is legit and not faked by AI will probably be quite useful in that world. And I've written about this extensively before on my Substack, which I'll have linked at the end of this presentation. But I think in the near future, if you're publishing your research, PDF papers probably won't be enough for people to trust its legitimacy, but they'll need more information to be able to like discern whether it's legit or not. And I think along with more information, we'll probably have to defend that information against manipulation as well too. And the defense against AI manipulation is on-chain attestation. So along with making your research artifacts open for people to audit, also like hashing them on-chain, so onto blockchains like Ethereum and Bitcoin to personally certify their legitimacy in a sense. Like you're almost like staking your reputation that like this information is legit. And by having that hash on chain, it prevents it from being manipulated or skewed by AI in the future. And Balaji Srinivasan has also commented on this before. He has a bunch of threads on this as well too. But I think like in the near future, we might see that like publication may look more like openly sharing your artifacts and attesting them on chain so that other researchers will at least be able to see all your code and data. They'll be able to see all your research artifacts openly. They'll be able to computationally reproduce your results. But then also if they wanted, like trace back the on-chain information supply chain to see that you have certified and attested to the legitimacy of this information. And it's through this, and through being like as open as possible by publishing your research as open as possible, that you kind of earn the trust that it is legit or not. And this is exactly what we're building at Scholar. A way to publish your research in a way that is as open and as transparent as possible and easy for other researchers to verify. So it's sort of like a verification layer for the code and data that you're publishing. And I'll show a quick demo of what we're working on here too. If you just go onto our site, there's like a pretty straightforward button right there to hop into the demo that we have on our site. But basically what we did is we took a pretty famous machine learning paper, deep residual learning for image recognition, and we created this like verification layer on top of it where you can see all the latest results, but then you can also dig into reproduce results with one click. Oops, that kind of goes off screen, doesn't it? Where you can verify results with one click. In the future, we also want to be able to change some of the inputs and parameters to the research here too, so you can test the robustness of the results under different assumptions. And then also see all the different like computational reproductions and replication of this research too. So be able to dig into what other people have reproduced under different assumptions and just see how robust these results are. So essentially a tool for verifying the legitimacy of research much more easily. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're also going to be putting this data on chain to just like certify and verify the legitimacy of it. But yeah, that's just like a quick demo of what we're working on. We're going to be working on improving it over like the next couple of months and years and whatnot. But yeah, that's like a quick prototype of what we got up so far. So yeah, the next piece that I'm going to be touching on is replication markets. This one is probably like a little bit easier to understand, but it's kind of like a crowd-determined estimate of how replicable research is. We saw it happen with the LK99 superconductor paper, and this is not even like a new idea per se. Robin Hanson was perhaps the first on it, and Vitalik Buterin has touched on it as well. But I think a new implementation may just be newly feasible with crypto. And I think replication markets will be especially useful when it's not feasible to fully replicate the research. Maybe it's too resource intensive or too cost intensive to fully replicate the research. So at least we can have an estimate on how replicable people think it is. We could perhaps even weight it by experts within the field. So it looks more of like a replication review than a peer review. And even just on-chain publication and replication markets themselves, I think are going to be quite useful in this future world where AI erodes our ability to determine and to discern the legitimacy of a lot of research. But I think there's also there's some longer term trends in automation and energy costs that I think it would be useful to lean into to also minimize the long-term cost to replicate research. So I'll first start with the observation that technology as a whole makes experimentation and replication cheaper. By automating things, we reduce costs and it becomes cheaper as a whole to like experiment and replicate research. And I think this trend of automation will probably be quite pronounced over the next 2 decades because there's some big technological innovations that are just on the horizon. And the big technological innovation there is humanoid robots. And there are some companies that are positioning themselves to reach quite massive levels of scale on the order of millions of robots a year. And I think that'll enable us to, one, like substitute a lot of human labor with machine capital, but also it'll like more broadly reduce the cost to like do experiments and like do replications more broadly. And the other big trend too is that we're probably going to see over the next 2 decades is lower cost energy through the mass implementation of solar panels, but also through nuclear adoption as well too. And increases in automation and low cost energy kind of feed into each other to dramatically reduce the cost of experimentation over the next like 2 decades or so. And I think the net result of that is that we're going to have a lot more resources to allocate towards experimentation and replication as well too. Like currently we're very resource constrained in science, where everybody is mainly just focused on pushing out new publications, pushing out new novel publications. And so we don't have a lot of latent resources to allocate towards ensuring the replicability of existing research and ensuring the rigor of the research that is out there. And I think this increased abundance through lower cost energy and through more automation will alleviate some of those issues over the next 2 decades or so. We're going to have much more capacity to potentially replicate research. And in theory, we could also use this increased bandwidth to even replicate important historical research. So maybe research that's like highly cited, but very contentious and important to be able to know whether it's legit or not in our historical scientific record. So I think we might have much more resources to go back and even like re-audit a lot of our scientific research as well too. And so this is sort of the vision, a potential vision for the future that I'd want to leave you with. And it's the vision of the future that I am personally trying to push towards, and a future that I think will probably be needed in the face of these big technological changes, especially with AI. And so I'm independently either building, supporting, or evangelizing each one of these. So if any of these interest you and you want to either like talk about it or help out, like please feel free to reach out. You can find our company website there. You can check out our demo there as well. If you're interested in like providing feedback on that as well, like feel free to reach out. Otherwise, you can also find me at manveer.xyz. Hopefully this was a little bit different and like unique potential perspective on where scientific research is going and what tools we can build for that future. But yeah, otherwise, like, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Manveer. That was awesome. Like a little glimpse into the future and potentially where things are headed. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. But I'll start this off. So you mentioned a lot about LK99, and that was
Mhm.
a really crazy 2-week sprint where everyone kind of rallied together in the scientific community,
Mhm.
even outside the scientific community. And so the big push there was, will it replicate? You had a bunch of third parties coming in, everyone was trying to replicate, because presumably the impact of that research was so high that
Mhm.
people felt inclined to want to reproduce it and replicate it of their own volition with their own resources, because the unlock that it would come of that would be vast for personally, probably for them, but also just generally. So I
Mhm.
guess my questions would be, so that's like kind of a corner case, right? That's like the 0.0001%. So now you
Yeah,
have
exactly.
all these publications that are coming out, and a lot of them need to be reproduced, but there isn't that kind of guttural drive from different scientists to try to reproduce it, because the impact isn't going to be this big stepwise increase in like how superconductors are made. So
Exactly. Yeah.
idea on like, how do you begin thinking about incentivizing the reproducibility of a bunch of things that might not have that big of an impact but are still impactful in some way?
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's a definitely a good question. And yeah, I do think that it won't be realistic for us to just like replicate all new research that gets published. One, like all new research just isn't potentially like even impactful enough to be able to allocate all those resources towards it. It's kind of the reason why I mentioned the other two alternatives of like both on-chain publication, but also replication markets too, where I think a lot of research, it won't make sense to allocate a lot of resources to fully replicate. But at the very least, it would be useful for researchers to share their work in a much more open and transparent way, so we can know whether it's legitimate or not. At least be able to like computationally reproduce results and like test the robustness of those results, but also like have potentially like replication markets to guess and like to bet on the potential replicability of that research as well too. Yeah, and I know ResearchHub is doing some stuff on shifting incentives as well too. So I won't like um, delve too deeply into that, but at least from my perspective, I think these are two like technological solutions that could be helpful for all the other cases that aren't that corner case.
Yeah, I think definitely hand in hand between those two things, you can, and I think some things that might build up into, say, like a lot of volume comes into a replication market, you kind of get the inclination a lot of people are interested in it, and maybe
Mhm.
like reproducibility experiment is warranted at that point.
Oh yeah, 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 exactly. If there's a lot of people like putting a lot of money towards betting on the reproducibility of some work, then there's like a financial incentive to then replicate that work for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the replication markets can guide our kind of perception on what needs to be um, kind of what needs to be incentivized versus what's sufficient for just the reproducibility market or the replication
Oh
market.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any questions here from the audience, or Ricardo, if you want to have anything you want to mention as well, feel free to.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for for the talk. It's been amazing. I mean, we talked about this a bit already. So
Yeah.
about reproducing studies. So I basically see the same challenges that you went through. I'm actually really looking forward to a solution. I don't know if we'll come out of what you're building, what we're trying to do with incentivizing this kind of behaviors. But I feel like the overall way in which the scientific space and the publishing space is changing could lend us a helping hand in finding a way to also make science more reproducible in the future. So kind of like a wishful thinking for the future, but
Mhm.
hopefully that's what we got in the end.
Yeah, that's what we're building for.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Manveer. So yeah, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, hopefully the rest of the conference goes well. All right. Bye.